We're very privileged to have Chris Cheng with us. Chris Cheng worked at Google starting in 2007, doing technical support for the Google Apps for Business, now known as G Suite. Chris trained and competed in History Channel's Top Shot Season 4 while at Google, and ultimately leaving Google upon completing that challenge right there that we just saw. It's pretty awesome. Previously, he spoke with Google in 2014 when Ars Technica co-founder John Stokes interviewed him upon release of the first edition of his book, Shoot to Win. In the years since, he's traveled the country, doing lots of speaking engagements and sharing his passion for the shooting sports. Now he's back to speak at Google and about the second edition of his book, His New Life in Shooting Sports, and his outreach on behalf of LGBT and Asian communities. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you so much for having me.
Very great to have you. So we just saw a little clip for those just watching the video from Top Shot. Why don't you explain what Top Shot is for us?
Top Shot is a competitive marksmanship challenge where 18 competitors from all walks of life across our country were selected to compete in a series of challenges. And the cool dynamic about the show is every episode there are a number of weapons that are introduced, but the competitors, we don't have any idea what the weapons are until literally we're standing there on the range, and the host, usually takes a tarp off and says, all right, here are the weapons. We get a little bit of training with a weapons expert, and then Top Shot creates these incredible challenges that are unique and are really not available anywhere else in the world. What you saw was the final challenge. It was a 7-station final gauntlet. We saw the last few stations, and so it was it's an incredibly fun show that immerses the viewer into the action. You probably saw a lot of that slow motion footage, bringing you, seeing, bullets leaving, the barrels and just explosions. And what is really exciting about Top Shot is it tests competitors' ability to adapt to unfamiliar situations and to adapt to ambiguity. And when I look back at the competition and things that prepared me for the competition, when I look back at my time at Google, everybody here at Google, there's lots of ambiguity that we deal with every single day. And in a moment's notice, you're expected to either think creatively, right, to solve a problem, and to move as fast as you can, shore up all your resources. Top Shot is I was on season 4, so there were 3 seasons before me, and I was just a regular guy watching it on TV and decided to apply and throw my hat in the ring.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah, you went on as the IT professional, kind of the underdog, and went on to win the competition. So you're here on the heels of releasing the second edition of your book, Shoot to Win. Well, I'll get right into it. Why do a second edition? What was wrong with the first one?
So thankfully, there's nothing wrong with the first edition. It sold really well. And so I had an opportunity to launch a second edition, which is the paperback version. The first edition was a hardcover. And so, with a paperback edition, it's a lower price point. More people can afford it. But I also had Katie Pavlich write the foreword for the second edition. Katie is editor of Town Hall, also a Fox News Channel contributor, also a gun owner as well. And so, for Shoot to Win, it is a book about everything that I studied and trained to win Top Shot. And another big thing about the second edition of Shoot to Win is I've included a bunch of references to free YouTube videos that are instructional videos complementing Shoot to Win. So that's kind of the summary of the second edition.
Great.
Cover, and I'm very excited for the second edition launch here.
Cool. So you mentioned that this was the summary of all your learnings. Is this the book that you wish you had while training for Top Shot?
Absolutely. And so, for background, I'm a self-taught amateur, and I did grow up with guns. I was born in Orange County, and my father was in the military. He didn't shoot guns as part of his service. He was a navigator in P-3 Orions during the Vietnam War, but the military was his introduction to firearms during basic training. And so when he taught me how to shoot, that was a very formative experience for me. I was 6 years old. He taught me the safety fundamentals of how to handle and operate a firearm. And so you fast forward to when I was working here at Google, training for the show. I was looking at all the resources that were available to me. And at the time, since I didn't have a lot of gun friends who could, I had some gun friends, but I didn't have a ton of instructors who could teach me all these things.
You lived in OC.
Yeah, I was mostly relying on the internet for advice, for guidance, to help me understand certain tactics, certain firearms, certain marksmanship fundamentals. And I remember reading about even something as basic as caliber. It's like, what is caliber, and why are some of these bullet measurements in the imperial system, others are in the metric system, and everyone has their way of explaining certain concepts. But Shoot to Win is my way of explaining things in the most simple terms possible. Shoot to Win is for the layman, right? It's for the beginner, someone who has no idea about anything about firearms, because like with anything new, if a topic is confusing, it can be intimidating, right? And it can be off-putting, right? If you start getting, too technical or too deep in the weeds about certain concepts. And so I wanted to really just whittle this down to the basics. And for me, when I think about firearms, a firearm is a tool. Right? There's many, many tools out there, and just like any tool, once you understand how to operate it safely, right, that naturally, you gain confidence, right, in how to use the tool. Right, if we need to chop down some trees, I'm like, hey, Austin, we need to use a chainsaw. And if you've never used a chainsaw before, I'm not just going to put a chainsaw in your hand and be like, go to it, right? We would need to talk about, all right, safety handling for the chainsaw and how to turn it on and safely cut wood. So for me, a firearm is very, very similar in that regard, that it's a tool that when the operator and the user, right, knows how to safely use it and handle it, then it becomes more approachable and usable for the for the average person.
Yeah, that's great. And I noticed that while reading this book, it really intrigued me how not only was an incredibly detailed book about how to start, but it also, in the introduction, really went over your philosophy for how you won Top Shot and how to kind of win at life in general. Can you tell us more about the philosophies that you've implemented when on the show and in the book?
Yeah, so as the title implies, right, shoot to win. But for me, it's not just about shooting to win. It's about winning in life, and a big part of that for me is my personal philosophy and attitude towards whatever it is that I'm working at. So, for example, when I was training for the show, I was putting in about 50 hours a week, here at Google as, normal work week. But on top of that, I was putting in 20 to 25 hours a week, right? I basically was treating training like a part-time job on top of my full-time job.
Yeah, that's a lot.
And so winning, to me, requires dedication, focus, and sacrifice. A big part of my training, I remember sending an email out to my family and to my friends, and I remember saying to them, hey, I'm training for this TV show. Most of my friends and family had no idea what Top Shot was. But I told them, hey, I'm training for the show, and I want to win. And in order for me to win, I need to go off the grid here and just fully dedicate myself towards learning as much as I can about marksmanship, because I knew how far behind the curve I was. Most of the Top Shot competitors are law enforcement, military, Olympic shooting champions, lifelong hunters, right? Like people who are like, this is not just a craft, but it is their life and their lifestyle, right? And then here I am, just like the self-taught amateur, who occasionally goes to the range on weekends. So I really needed to catch up, and I told my friends and family, if you're going to, I appreciate all the invitations, family dinners to birthday parties, but unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to make it. I won't be attending. After this whole Top Shot thing is over, though, yes, I will, resume my regular, social life. But so winning requires sacrifice and hard work, and very rarely in life do things come free or easy, and that is a big part of the philosophical part of Shoot to Win. Is that, when we talk about firearms safety and education, you can't just buy a gun and expect that it's just going to protect you. The user needs to train him or herself, right, on how to safely operate and use it. And then beyond just the usage, right, there's additional layers of training and tactics around home defense, personal protection. But it does require, right, effort and time and sacrifice and dedication to a craft in order to win. And that's not just for, learning how to shoot guns. It's about the work that we do in our daily careers. It's, right, whatever personal goals that we set out for ourselves and that we want to accomplish in our lives, that winning is what makes us better, because it's that competition of ideas, and it's the competition of people and companies that ultimately get, it makes everything better.
Yeah, that's some heavy philosophy. Within that philosophy, I remember reading about using a mental checklist to keep yourself calm. Do you use checklists in other parts of your life as well?
Yeah. So a big part of Shoot to Win is, for me, it was about taking skills that I had developed in other parts of my life and applying that to the show. And, I really have to credit Google for a lot of the skills-based mindset, right? When we talk about, personal development plans, right, and what do you want your career to look like? One approach to one's career could be, well, I want to become a, insert title, right? I want to be a director, I want to be a VP, or I want to be a manager. Well, like that's all good and all, but how do you get, right? How do you actually achieve those goals? And the answer is, you need to have the skills, right? You need to have the skills, and then you need to actually accomplish the work, right, to earn the title of whatever it is that you want. So, the skills piece here is something that, when I think about, right, this mental checklist concept. So when I was younger, I played a lot of baseball. My father taught me how to play golf. I'm also a musician, and so when I learned how to play baseball and golf, it was all about a checklist, right? So everything from throwing a ball to swinging a bat, right, for me on a double basis. So, right, how do you properly, right, play scales, execute certain types of, attacks on the string, right? It's all a checklist, right, that I have to have proper hand positioning, feet positioning, right, motion in my hips, et cetera, et cetera. And shooting is for me, it's an easy way for me to overlay an existing framework, this checklist framework. I overlay that checklist framework when I'm shooting as well.
Yeah, I was watching the show, and I think you talked about it as well, and I noticed how it kind of helped you overcome the ambiguity that you mentioned earlier, because you had this checklist, especially with the Atlatl competition you did.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know what Austin just said, the word was Atlatl. It is man's prehistoric weapon system. It's basically a spear chucker. And I had never, ever heard of this weapon. And I ended up in an elimination challenge going head-to-head. And I had 1 hour with an Atlatl specialist, and believe it or not, yes, there are Atlatl specialists who are quite skilled. And I had to create a checklist for myself, because for me, that's just the way that I learn things, right? To bring clarity and structure to ambiguous situations. And then it's about repeating the checklist and the steps over and over and over and over again. And, quick reference point, Malcolm Gladwell in one of his books, right, famously stated, it takes 10,000 repetitions in order to even begin to be a master of that particular skill. And so I remember having kind of that 10,000 number and just ingrained in my head, and thinking, okay, with this Atlatl challenge, I need to at least get like 1,000 repetitions of my checklist and my framework. And I only had maybe 12 hours. Basically, we had, it was like, 3 p.m., that afternoon, where I got 1 hour of training with the Atlatl expert. And then that next morning at, 11 a.m., I was going into the challenge. And of course, I had to sleep, during that time as well. But that mental checklist, right, I've developed that skill set, right, of having a checklist, adhering to the checklist, and when things start to go wrong, I fall back on the checklist.
Yeah, I feel like that's actually been something that's helped me to a degree when I'm doing any type of competition now. I've tried to implement having a checklist, because I've definitely been in several situations where I'm about to compete and all of a sudden everything I know just goes out the window. So I appreciate that. And you mentioned to me that you were doing a bit of outreach. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, when I won Top Shot in 2012, I thought that was just going to be the end of it. And I kind of acknowledged that there'd be maybe a few 5 seconds of fame kind of thing, and then I'd maybe come back to Google or come back to tech. But I ended up spending 3.5 years full time in the firearms industry. And, I was looking for opportunities where I can make a difference. And a big opportunity for me has been about diversity and inclusion, specifically around LGBT and Asian outreach and inclusion. And, what has been such a pleasant surprise for me is having my own negative stereotypes and preconceptions about gun owners just bursted. So when I came in the firearms industry, I was ready for a lot of anti-gay comments and people who would I be shunned, right, in the firearms industry because I'm gay? Is that going to be a problem? And I was kind of gearing up in my head for I'm going to go to battle with any of these bigots and stuff. But to my pleasant surprise, those fears that I had in my head, they never materialized. And I can tell you that the firearms industry, both at the executive level and also just your average gun owner, I've just interacted with thousands and thousands and thousands of gun owners all across the country who they could care less that I'm gay. And that, I believe, is a huge mark of success of diversity and inclusion, where ultimately, like, I don't really want to be special because I'm gay. I just want to be treated equally like everybody else. And for me, right, equality and equal treatment means that I'm just treated like everybody else. And when I say I'm married to my husband, I eventually I don't want anybody to like flinch, right? It should just be, oh, all right, great, you're married to your husband. Like, what's his name? What does he do? Right? All your typical, right, natural, questions that, right, come with a generic conversation of, right, talking about your spouse.
You just want to be normal. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get that. And so you don't feel like you've had to fight against any stereotypes in your shooting career?
Yeah, I mean, so to be real, it hasn't been all rainbows and butterflies, if you will, but the overwhelming reception has been positive. And so, of course, right, sure, you're always going to have, some amount of anti-LGBT sentiment. But for me, I see that, like, that's the opportunity, right? It's the opportunity for me to engage, at minimum, to be present, to be vocal, and advocate for LGBT rights, advocate for safety, LGBT safety as well. You know, obviously the gay community, we're a marginalized group that is at times targeted, you know, for violence. If you take, well, I don't want to get too deep here, but right, there's been a lot of right shootings, you know, targeting the LGBT community, and you know, the firearm is a great equalizer, right? Whether we're talking about the LGBT community, the Asian community, to touch a little bit upon Asian advocacy, there are so many Asian American shooters in the gun community, way more than I realized. My home range in Richmond, California, up in the Bay Area, there is every weekend, I would say probably 30% of the shooters there are Asian, and then out of that 30%, about half of them are Filipinos. There's just like Filipinos all over the place, and it's so cool to see that. You know, one thing I think that's really been interesting for me to learn through my experience is that, you know, gun ownership for gun owners is not always about the gun. It is about freedom and values like self-reliance and independence, and then this piece about community, right? A lot of gun owners, like, they go to the range, yes, to shoot, but it's almost as much as, you know, for the social interaction, right? The community aspect of knowing that I have a group of people who I can rely on, either just, you know, for fun, for you know, for support, etc. But that's been a really eye-opening experience for me to see, you know, the Asian community be such actually prominent you know, component of the community. And the second thing I want to mention really quick is, you know, in 1992 here in LA, right, we had the Rodney King riots. And I was 12 years old at the time, you know, living in Orange County. I'm living at home. And I remember seeing the riots on TV. And as a 12-year-old, you know, you only take in so much of certain experiences. And, you know, all I remember was, you know, LA was on fire. You know, Rodney King, Reginald Denny, and right, some of these, like, kind of the big moments, Mark Fuhrer, et cetera, or Fuhrman. But anyway, the piece that I've learned as an adult was Koreatown. So during the Rodney King riots, you know, Koreatown was very near, right, all the rioting and the looting and violence. And the Korean American community contacted LAPD to say, you know, the riots are coming our way. We need help. Please send, right, your officers and barricades. And the LAPD at the time, they were overwhelmed. You know, the National Guard was coming in, right? And there were other priorities. And so the Koreatown basically had to take care of themselves. And Korean Americans were using their personal firearms to protect their businesses, their personal property, and themselves.
Yeah, I've seen the videos.
Yeah, right. So if you Google, you know, Koreatown Rodney King riots, you will and go to Google image search, like, you will see, right, these images of Korean Americans patrolling on the roofs of their businesses, right down across the way here. So, you know, the firearms ownership and usage, when it comes to Asian Americans, it's been another kind of fascinating, kind of experience to look into.
That's great, thank you. And one thing you're heavily involved in is safety and education with the NSSF. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So with the industry, so I'm a safety ambassador. Where, you know, I'm very much promoting safety and education. And so with the industry, we created a whole set of 25 YouTube videos that I mentioned earlier, where it's all about the basic fundamentals of marksmanship that complement the book Shoot to Win. So, you know, for me, you know, if we want to organize the world's information and make it universally acceptable and useful, accessible. There we go. Accessible and useful. Remembering my Google days here. It's about, right, generating useful content. And for me, because I attribute the internet, right, to teaching me so much about about safety and about marksmanship fundamentals that I want to give back, right? I think each of us as individuals, we have a duty to share information, right? To make it useful, to make it accessible. And so these YouTube videos, yeah, they're free. They're 2 to 4 minute long segments. And I acknowledge that we all learn in different ways, right? So while some people like reading a book, other people need to see a video. And so ultimately it's about, I want to let users choose how they want to consume the information. That's
great. And should people that have never or may never shoot be interested in learning about firearm safety?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I would say even if you are never interested in learning how to shoot, I still think it's important to just understand the safety fundamentals. And some of the basics are: don't put your finger on the trigger unless you're ready to shoot. Don't point a gun at something you don't intend to destroy. And so, if you are a non-gun owner, a non-shooter, that if you see, right, if you just happen to be in an environment where, right, maybe it's a family member or a friend who maybe is just showing off some of their collection at home over Thanksgiving dinner or something like that, that at a minimum, like you can recognize what safe gun handling looks like.
And should beginners, people who are likely reading your book, should they be scared of any particular weapon when they're starting out?
It's an interesting question. The short answer is no. The new shooter shouldn't be scared of any particular weapon because, the basics of firearm safety, they cut across all different makes and models. I would say the nuance to this question is back to this caliber conversation. To really simplify, caliber is the diameter of the bullet at its widest point. And generically speaking, the larger the caliber, the larger the boom. The larger the boom, the harder the gun can be to control. So for a new shooter, for example, I'm not going to put a large caliber firearm in a new shooter's hand and be like, here, go at it. Just like anything, you got to start small, right? It's all baby steps, right? Hey, let's start with a .22 caliber firearm. Once you're more comfortable with that, we can move our way up into 9mm, et cetera, et cetera.
And how safe are shooting sports?
Yeah. The shooting sports it's one of the safest sports out there. There aren't many gun deaths related to the shooting sports. It is our dedication to safety, right? So the shooting sports, of course, right? It's a competition. It's supposed to be fun and friendly, but that needs to be supported, right, with safety as the core fundamental, right? You can't have fun unless you're safe, and that the people participating in the activity are safe. It's interesting to think about, right, other sports, right, where there are people who die in football and other sports, but the shooting sports is incredibly safe, and I don't know anybody who's died or been seriously injured as a result of participating in the shooting sports.
That's great. Yeah, you have to fact check me on it, but I heard that it was statistically like one of the safest sports, injury-wise. So how do you get started safely with a firearm if you don't know anyone, if you don't have any kind of mentor in the business?
Yeah, that's basically kind of where in some ways I started, right? If you don't have, any friends or family members, I would say, go seek out the information, whether it's my book, Shoot to Win, or whether it's, finding other authoritative resources online. Most local gun ranges have some kind of beginners, shooting either seminar or, if you go rent a gun at a range, pretty much every range, as long as you acknowledge yourself or identify yourself as a new shooter, right, they're more than happy to help walk you through, right, the basic fundamentals because, they want to make sure you're safe, that the people around you are also safe. And so, yeah, those are some very basic ways to get involved if you're interested.
I've noticed that at both rifle and archery ranges that everyone is always right there to help you if you need help, if you're asking for it. So, okay, so I just have a couple questions that are kind of miscellaneous questions, and we'll hand it off to the audience. So number one, as a shooting competitor or someone who's getting into shooting sports, how do you pay for ammo?
Yeah. So, ammunition is usually a considerable cost.
Yeah.
Some competitors actually make their own ammo, either through buying the different components. So you've got a cartridge, which is basically kind of like a metal tube. You've got a primer, which is basically a snap cap that goes in the back. Then you have gunpowder, and then you have the bullet. So a lot of competitors will buy all those separate components, and then you have a machine, right, where you can basically load, right, all the components and make your own ammo. If you get super advanced, but it's funny, being advanced actually is very basic, where there are some competitors who will go get lead, right? They'll reclaim lead from a range and they will melt it down. Then they will literally, cast their own bullets.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's a way to save money, but obviously that requires a lot more work. For sponsored shooters like I was, Bass Pro Shops, they paid for all my ammunition, and it was pretty incredible, I gotta say, to have that kind of logistical and financial support from a national sponsor. But what's really interesting is to become a really good marksman actually doesn't require shooting a lot of live rounds out of a gun. One thing that I learned when I was training is you can perform what's called dry firing. So dry firing is when you're just shooting an empty gun. You can either put plastic or the kind of inert bullet-shaped or cartridge-shaped objects right into the gun to simulate the action, but it doesn't actually fire anything. So back to, repeating a motion 10,000 times before you become, begin to become a master. Dry fire is a way that I was able to practice in my own home, right, with an unloaded firearm, right, with what are called snap caps, which again are these sort of like fake inert rounds. And I just, I'd be watching TV and just, practicing the fundamentals. Alternatively, there are laser guns, right? So it's literally just like, plastic or metal shaped, gun, but instead of, it doesn't shoot anything other than a laser every time you pull the trigger. So that's a big way to save money and to train, pretty much literally anywhere where you can, just, shoot a laser gun.
beam. Mm-hmm. Nice. Cool. Well, I think I've asked enough questions. Let's pass it off to the audience. We got a box here. You can catch it and throw it around to each other.
Okay, so when I'm practicing, which clearly I need more of.
You came close.
Not that close.
Not that close.
There's always a sort of trade-off between practicing enough and then fatigue, where your technique gets really bad as you've practiced too much. What are your, techniques or approach to managing that?
Yeah, at a certain point, there's diminishing returns, right? When you're practicing anything. I think when I am experiencing fatigue, right, towards the tail end of a practice session, it's a question of, do I need to stop? So I guess in my mind, back to the sort of checklist, if my fatigue is in any way compromising me, being able to safely handle a firearm, then I just need to stop, right? So that's kind of like, core principle number one. If I'm just too tired and exhausted, right, my legs are tired or my eyes are tired, or I'm just kind of, if I'm losing too much focus, right, then I just need to stop. But I think, right, there are other moments where you need to ask yourself, I am fatigued and tired, is this a moment where I can push, right? Because to build up your endurance, right, ultimately, right, we all need to learn, hey, when we're up against the wall and we're tired, you've been programming for 10 hours or whatever, do you stop or do you keep on pushing? Because I think ultimately, if you want to be really good at a craft, I would say, generically speaking, it's about how long can you execute the task at a high caliber and high competency, and improving your endurance is obviously a big part of that.
I noticed during our competition here that while overall you're hitting the center target most of the time, you had a tendency towards the higher side. Is that an explicit aiming strategy?
Good question. I'll be honest and say no. But to your point, right? Every firearm, every weapon system is a little bit different. So naturally, right, with like Nerf darts, right, there's going to be some kind of arc. It depends on how far you are. Clearly, there is some wind blowing around, but not enough wind to like, right, really knock the projectile off course. And one thing that I've learned in competition is sometimes, right, when we're under stress, the adrenaline rush, right, it shuts off the thinking part of our brain, and then we sort of revert back to like dumb amphibians and just sort of right trying to do the same thing, expecting a different result, which is just obviously not logical. And so I actually wasn't even paying attention to that because I was just sort of just amped up for the challenge. So if I had noticed what was happening, right, I would have like taken a pause and said, okay, wait, my shots are landing high. What do I need to do here? And it's probably just I need to aim a little bit lower. But obviously, things worked out for me in this challenge.
And those targets are regulations, so you don't have to worry.
With all the news of like gun violence and gun control being around lately, I was just wondering what your thoughts were on those.
Yeah, clearly it's such a top of mind topic for not just Americans, but really across the world. And I think my comment here is it goes back to education, that often we have either decision makers that they aren't educated enough, right? They don't really understand what reasonable or effective solutions, right, might be available for us. And I think when you read headlines, the media just in general, they oversimplify everything, right? It doesn't matter what the topic is. But what I've learned is that there are a lot of nuances, and it's often not as simple as saying, hey, we just need to ban the thing or restrict it. Now, not to say that that can't be effective, but the problem is certain actions have either unintended downstream consequences that, right, if we think, oh, the short-sighted solution might be to ban the thing, but then downstream, right, I think about prohibition, right, when our country decided, you know what, we're going to ban alcohol. And you know what happened? It gets driven underground. When it is so easy to make a thing, right, whether we're talking about alcohol, whether we're talking about a firearm is not that hard to make. Americans have been making their own guns for centuries. And so when we talk about right, gun violence and possible solutions, it is much more nuanced and complicated. I think one thing that I really want to share, and a kind of a pretty deep insight that I've learned over the years that touches upon this topic, is kind of back to the concept that for a lot of gun owners, it's not always about the gun, but it's about what it represents. And it comes back to identity, and it comes back to safety, personal safety, right? That for many gun owners, right, I own a gun, I feel safe with my gun. I see my gun as the thing that will protect myself, my family, my property, etc. So when we have these conversations about, when we talk about gun violence, and then naturally, right, the conversation at some point will lead to some kind of conversation around restrictions, banning. Those conversations strike deep, deep, deep into the heart of gun owners' personal identity, right? That many gun owners, right, they see this chatter, and basically the interpretation is these people don't want me to exist, right? That they don't agree with the fact that I own a gun, that they don't want me or my lifestyle or my philosophy to exist. And for me, when I think about being gay, right, I know what that sensation is like, right? That there are people out there who are vehemently anti-gay. They wish I was dead. Right? They wish all gay people were dead, right, and disappeared off this earth. And so as a gun owner, I mean, I also know what that sensation is like, too, for people to say, oh, I don't, I think guns are bad, that gun owners shouldn't, own guns. But so it comes back to education and research and really understanding not just the technical mechanics around firearms, but there's also the political and the policy mechanics, right, around firearms laws and how they're enforced or not enforced in many ways. At a high level, to really, I think, address the heart of your question is probably like, how do we fix this problem, right? I mean, I'm saddened and shocked and horrified, right, every time there's yet, right, another, right, instance of gun violence, and I have right, nobody wins. Nobody wins, right, when people are dying. That's a sort of, right, core basic tenet. So for me, right, I think back to, right, how can I make a difference? And, for me, like, my small part is education and training, and to really highlight that, look, your average gun owner, right, we're just regular people, right, who want to protect ourselves, our loved ones, our communities, right, to make sure that, right, we all feel safe. So it's complicated, but I'm also confident that ultimately we'll get there. I mean, things are pretty bad right now, right? And they seem to only be getting worse. But there was a time in our country where things were better, and I think most things go in cycles, right? Whether we're talking about this, the political environment, et cetera. So it's a matter of time. But if we engage on the topic, right, we can't be scared, right? We can't be afraid to talk about these issues, because running away from problems is not the way to solve them.
So you were talking about that really bizarre spear. What's some of the other weapons that you were able to get exposed to that you had never seen before that were just like, wow, what is this?
Yeah. I mean, the Atlatl is definitely one of probably the biggest, like, whoa, what is this thing? But I think another weapon that comes to mind is the M1919 machine gun. So what's so cool about Top Shot is, since it's on the History Channel, a lot of the challenges are rooted in history. So the M1919 machine gun, it's a World War I, World War II machine gun. And this challenge that I competed in, they found a half-track, which is it's a big army truck with wheels on the front, but tank treads in the back with an open bed. And they mounted this machine gun right into the open bed of the truck, and they sped us competitors at 30 miles an hour, down a pathway, and there was a simulated war field of mortar explosions, and so we had to shoot right at these exploding targets. And I mean, that was just like an experience of a lifetime, and I don't know if I'm ever going to have an opportunity to do that again. I think another weapon that was truly fun and unique was it's a pistol called the FN57. So it's a 5.7 millimeter round that is it screams at a super high velocity. So it's a small round. It's a super fun gun to shoot, and the challenge that I was in, it was a SWAT rappelling challenge. So there was a custom, 3-story, kind of facade that the Top Shot team built. We're strapped in, with a carabiner, with rope and a pulley kind of device, and shoot targets through windows, unload, holster, rappel down to the next level, engage more exploding targets, and so that was just another great challenge where I did very well, and had no rappelling or SWAT team experience. So that was great.
Yeah, thank you. We have time for one more question. I think we had a hand up over there.
What age do you think is appropriate for maybe starting education on guns? For example, like I grew up in the South, so there was surrounded by guns. There's much more available. And you develop a different kind of respect for the safety and the treatment of guns than you might otherwise would. And I kind of feel that it's important now that I have children to start teaching them, like, basically a lot of the gun safety things. Don't play around with these things. Mm-hmm. Don't put your finger on the trigger, and so yeah, I was just wondering, like, what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, great question. It is never too young to learn the basics of firearm safety. So for young children, the industry has a simple framework for young kids, which is basically look, don't touch, tell an adult. That's it, right? So there's an ambassador, his name's Eddie Eagle, right? So there's, children's books that just reiterate those core steps, which is actually great for adults too. Like, look, don't touch, go tell an adult, right? Or go tell a gun owner, right? Hey, like there's this gun over here, don't touch it. The next step, though, is it's kind of natural. Like, well, if you want to teach your children how to shoot, what's the right age? And the answer is it always depends. I mean, my father taught me how to shoot when I was 6 years old, and he decided, right, that me being 6 years old was sufficient. But right, not all 6-year-olds are created equal. And so it's really, I would say, I mean, I'm not a parent, but I would say that, right, each parent needs to make his or her own determination as to, right, when your child is ready to learn how to actually shoot. But the basic fundamentals of safety, right, can start at any age.
Yeah, I think I got my first rifle in 5th grade.
Very cool.
All right, well, I think that's all the time we have for questions. Big round of applause for Chris, and